everyone, it's Sarah and welcome to my crochet channel. Today's video is our last video for our Grantastic crochet along that we did in 2019. Now if you don't know what that is, I'll put that link down in the notes under this video because all of these square patterns will always be on my YouTube channel in the YouTube playlist called Grantastic Crochet Along. There's also patterns that are written out that you can find underneath every one of those videos. And so basically what we did is we crocheted one square each month and we did 4 squares of that one square. And today I'm going to show you how to join all those squares together, or basically how I did it. Now I used what's called the continuous join method or join as you go. Now there are lots of different stitches and lots of different ways that you can do this. And so for today's demonstration, I'm going to be showing you how I join mine together using single crochet stitches. And again, you can find that blog link that has lots of pictures and explanations on it underneath this video. Now, before we get started, I wanted to answer a couple of questions that I've received concerning the squares. The first question is, what do I do if my squares are too small? So basically each month we did a 6-inch square. Now, if you stitched tighter maybe that month and your square is just a little bit smaller, maybe a 1/4 or a 1/2 inch, you can always block your squares. Now, you don't have to. I like to block my squares before I do my joining together. That way they fit much better together when it comes time to join them without having to ease and stretch them out. And so what I do is I just pin them down on my blocking boards, and then I spritz them with just some water and I let them dry. It just makes a more uniform square and makes it easier to put them together. Another thing that you can do if your squares are too small and it's more than just an inch, or I should say about an inch, what you can do is you can always add another row around in a single crochet stitch. That way, if just in case it's too small, you won't have to fit it in. You can stitch around a row of single crochet and then it will fit together. And one thing to keep in mind, because we did do 12 different squares, they're not all going to have the same amount of stitches on the edge. And the main thing is just to make sure that they're the same size and they're going to fit together. If it's too big, say you've got all your squares ready to go and you've got a couple that are just too big, you can always take a full row out and then add a single crochet row to even them up. All right? But really, don't let that frustrate you. We can always ease them in if it's just a little bit, especially with the way that we're going to join them. To make our blanket, you're going to need 48 6-inch squares, and that's going to give us a blanket that's approximately 36 by 48. All right, so you need 48 squares or 4 squares from each month. All right, now I was going to join all of my squares with the same color so that it would be all monochromatic, but I decided I wanted to use a different color, and I really like how this gray works with this blue teal color. And so all of my squares are worked with Red Heart Super Saver. I think the color is called Turk, which is kind of an aqua blue, a little towards the blue than the green. And I'm going to use this gray. It's also Red Heart Super Saver, just something that I had on hand. It's just a basic gray color. And you're going to need approximately 5 ounces of your trim color to put your squares together, and that's estimating just a little bit high. I'm going to be using my H hook because that's the hook I've used for all my squares. You'll need your scissors And then you'll also need a needle to weave in your ends. But remember, we're going to do the continuous join, and you won't have to be weaving in all those ends. We're going to be putting them all together, and you'll just have to weave in at the beginning and the end. It's going to save you a bunch of time. So here is a picture of how I've laid out all of my squares. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's 6 by 8, which is my 48 squares. And this is the way I'm going to lay mine out. Now I did, when I made the original blanket, I did move them around a little bit. So I was trying to make sure that similar squares weren't together. And so I moved them around a little bit different. But this is how you want to lay them out. You want to lay them out 6 by 8. And if you'll notice here, I've got some arrows. We're going to begin by stitching with our bottom square. And I'm going to explain this to you, and then I'm going to show it to you, just so you can get a good idea of what we're doing. We're going to be following these arrows. So we're going to single crochet across the bottom of the first square. We're going to single crochet up, and then we're going to single crochet back across. Then we're going to join the next square, and we're going to single crochet these two squares together. And then we'll single crochet up and across, and then single crochet the next two squares together. And you'll work that for your first 6 squares. All right, let me grab this other chart. It's the same chart, but you'll notice there's a big arrow going down. And what that means is once we get all 6 of our first squares together, we're going to join our squares to each one, stitching single crochets straight down. I know that seems a little confusing, but I wanted you to see the way that it's going to work before we get started. So I've got some squares laid out that I'm going to show you for the demonstration. I've got my yarn. All right, so we're going to move these up, and we're going to be stitching on the front or right side of our square. So here's my first square. I'm going to join right in that chain 2 of the corner. And then I'm going to single crochet across. And I'll bring the camera in closer so you can see what I'm doing. So this is my first square, and I'm going to single crochet in each stitch across. And I'm going to stitch this just a little bit loose, not real tight, just in case I need a little playroom, because remember, we did 12 different squares, and sometimes the stitches may not line up. So what I try to do is stitch 1 single crochet in each stitch, whether it's a triple, a double, a single, or a chain 1. That way they'll line up pretty evenly. And I'll talk a little bit about how to make sure they line up as we go along. All right, so now I'm to the corner. I'm going to stitch 2 single crochets in this corner, and that's just going to help it come around that corner nice and neatly. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to single crochet across this row. I'm going to place 2 single crochets in this corner, and then I'm going to single crochet across here. So I single crocheted across the bottom. I placed 2 single crochets in the corner. I single crocheted across the side, and I placed 2 single crochets in that corner. And then I single crocheted across the third side. We're not going to single crochet on this side. What we're going to do is we're going to join this square to this square with this row of single crochets. Now we want to make sure that the front is facing up, and then we're going to put these together. I'm going to go in that chain 2 space on both sides and stitch a single crochet, and that just gets us where we need to be. And now we're going to single crochet across, joining the 2 sides together. Now you may have more stitches on one side than the other. And so what I do is I try to keep them lined up. I have a chain 2 here, so I'm going to put 2 single crochets in there so they stay lined up. And you're just going to have to eyeball it, and you may have to skip a stitch. There we go. In order to keep it straight and even. There we go. I pull it out a little bit from time to time. I pull it over, making sure everything's nice and straight. Because remember, not all our squares are going to have this exact amount of stitches. And so we just want to try to keep it even the best that we can so that when we get to the end of the row, they'll be nice and even. And this one's shaping up nicely. And probably most of them will, but there'll be that oddball one where you'll have to work with it just a little bit. All right, so here we are, the last 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. Now we're at the corner, so we'll go right in that single crochet. And then I'm going to chain 1, and that's going to hold it in place. Okay, so I'm going to turn it so you can see how that looks. Here's where we started. We single crocheted across, up, and then across, and then we single crocheted back across, joining our next square. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go right in there and we're going to single crochet up the side of this square. And then we'll continue. We'll work up this side. We'll put 2 single crochets in the corner, and then we'll work up this side. So here's our first square. We joined these 2 together. Then I single crocheted up this side, placed 2 single crochets in the corner, and then single crocheted across. And now we're going to join the next square. So make sure that it's right side facing out, and we'll put it together on here just like we did the other one. We'll join in that chain 2 space in the corner. There we go. And now we'll single crochet across again, making sure everything's even and stitching the 2 squares together. Whoops. There we go. And so I'll continue stitching across this square so that we have 3 squares that are hooked together. And now I have my 3 squares hooked together. And you would continue this in the same way until you have 6 squares that are hooked together. When you get to your last square, your 6th square in your row, you're going to again single crochet up the side, but you're not going to single crochet at the top, because we're going to be moving down the side, adding on more squares. There we go. Now, one thing I do want to remind you is there is not a set amount of single crochets that you need to have on each row. You just need to make sure that they're laying evenly and they're not rippling up on you too close together, or they're not too far apart. All right, so here I am at the corner. I'm going to chain 1 so it holds in place. And now what we're going to do, let me grab this other picture just so that you remember, that has the arrow straight down. Here is our row that we've already put together. And now we're going to work back down, adding in our squares. All right, so what we're going to do is, again, we're going to make sure that our square is facing up. We're always working on the front. All right, so we're going to put these together and we're going to join them together the same way that we did over here on these rows. So we've got our new square and we've got where we're adding it in, and this is where we would be at the top with our 6th square, and we're going to single crochet these two together. And again, we're going to ease them in, making sure everything's nice and even, and that our squares fit nicely together. So I've single crocheted across, stitching those two together. I'm going to grab my next square and we'll go right in the top of that stitch and go right in here, and we'll just keep right on going, working this one down the same way. Easing it in, making sure it fits, and stitching single crochets across. I single crocheted across, attaching one square, the second square, and now I'm going to attach the third square. And you'll do this all the way back down, attaching all 6 of your squares for this row. And again, we're not cutting our yarn. We don't have ends to weave in. We're just continuously going, adding our squares as we go. Once you've attached your 6 squares by stitching straight down like I showed you, it brings you to the bottom, and we're going to single crochet across the bottom of this square, and then we're going to repeat what we did on step 1. You'll stitch across, you'll stitch up, you'll stitch across, and then you'll join these 2 squares by stitching across. And you'll repeat step 1 and 2 for 8 rows so that your blanket is 6 by 8. Squares, that is. Once you have all your squares hooked together, you should have a blanket that is 6 by 8 squares, which is about 36 by 48 inches, all hooked together with our continuous join single crochet style. Now remember, there are lots of different ways to do continuous join. You can do the granny square style, you can do any stitch, slip stitch, single, double, triple, whatever you want to do. I just prefer for this particular blanket to do the single crochet. So once you've completed all your squares, the last thing you're going to do is just stitch a row of single crochet completely all the way around your blanket. And I'm not going to show you how to do a single crochet. You know by doing all the single crochet you did in joining your blanket. You're basically just going to stitch one single crochet in each of the stitches around to form a nice even row of single crochet all the way around all four sides of your blanket. And then in the corner, don't forget to do those 2 single crochets so that it moves around that corner nice and smoothly. And so now the only thing you have to weave in with your needle is where we began and where we ended. And that will save you a bunch of time as well as a bunch of yarn, because you didn't have to cut it and weave it in every side you joined. Now, once you get to this point, if you want to fancy it up a little bit, you can do whatever trim edge you would like. I'm just leaving mine solid because I want the squares that we made, all the fun different squares, to be the star of this blanket. And this one's going to be sitting on the end of my bed on my trunk. And so I think it's perfect. I think it's beautiful. And that's how easy it is to do the continuous join. And I love the method because I hate weaving in